From the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased. Joining me from the west coast of the US, Art Rivilis. He's the CTO of Augment. The way I love to do things is I don't like to take much from the spotlight of my guests. So this is why I usually keep it to them to introduce themselves. But Art, before I give it to you, I start to do this and people start to like it. I give teaser of what we're gonna talk about today. So what do you expect us to talk about? So we're gonna talk a little bit, of course, about our journey. We're gonna talk about being a CTO and of course solving problems. Art, have done some M&As, merger and acquisitions from tech perspective. So we're gonna shed some light on this, and of course, we're gonna see how the flow would go, and we will follow it. And of course, we will not miss anything without talking about AI and building engineering teams.
Great.
So without further ado, Art, I will give it to you. Tell us a bit more about you, your background, your journey, and what you're currently up to, and then of course we can take the discussion from there. So the floor is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how early to start? I think I've always really had a lot of love for tech. I remember when I was I came here as an immigrant, spoke zero English to the States when I was 7 or 8 years old. And I remember kind of like one of my earliest memories was my teacher, elementary school teacher at the time, where I knew I could barely speak, but she had written this sort of note to my parents saying we really like having Art in our class, and he really likes computers. And my dad had gotten me a very someone had given him basically this computer with DOS on it, and it had BASIC. This was I was 9 or 10. And I was just, at the time it was very simple, but I was, would hack away on it. And so for me, really early on, I knew what I wanted to do, right? I really loved building things and being able to make something out of nothing from scratch. And it was something that just really gave me a lot of satisfaction, just, spending a couple of hours on making something that was just useful for me or for someone else. When I was in, as early as middle school, I learned Visual Basic, and I built this quiz software that all of our biology classes ended up using. And it was super cool. So at the time that was certainly not a thing, kind of computer administered tests. And it made it super easy for the teacher to grade. And I was like, wow, this is so cool, and how powerful this is. So for me, it was really clear when I couldn't go too far from home. So I ended up, really kind of applying to just schools in California, and specifically Berkeley, which was the closest school. Lucky for me, that's also where I had met my wife. So it was a good decision all around, I like to think. And I focused entirely on computer science and math, and the two things that I really honestly just loved. And it's hard to love them because at UC Berkeley, at least computer science is an incredibly rigorous program. You're kind of put through the meat grinder with lots of other students. And so it's really hard, and it's a lot of work and a lot of sleepless nights. There I really focused on something that seems very unconventional, but I worked with Jan Stoika. I really like network programming, and Jan Stoika was one of the founders of Databricks. But he was a brilliant guy, and I really loved working with him. And I was like, at that point, I was like so sure I was going to go into building distributed systems because I found them to be so fascinating at the time. And then, this was I started looking for internships, and it was a kind of a tough market. This was, right after the dot-com bust. It's like 2004. There just wasn't a lot of jobs, and I ended up landing a job at VMware doing front end stuff, which of course like totally didn't marry up with the plans that I had, right? Like I was like, oh, I'm sure I want to do distributed systems. Couldn't find any internships that had anything to do with that, and ended up doing front end work. But it was like I was up for new challenges. It was quite different. But one of the things I did really like about it was that I could build something that people touched, right? That people like used with their own two hands, and it wasn't something that was kind of like behind the scenes and that no one really saw. So it was a kind of an exciting thing for me as a kind of a change of pace.
Mm-hmm.
And after VMware, my boss at VMware had left and started his own company, and he recruited me to join his company. And that was like my first foray into startups. That was kind of like the beginning. And I had this sort of contrast, this experience of like VMware, which was already I was post-acquisition, but it was fairly large, fairly established company, where I was working on one kind of very narrow thing, to this kind of open world of startups where, there is nothing, right? You're starting from nothing. And so everything you build is meaningful and impactful. And I kind of got addicted to that. I just thought that was a really, really exciting and fun. And I pretty much just stayed with startups from then. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning.
That's a very cool journey, I would say, Art. Like trying multiple things before you get what
you find what you love. Yeah,
exactly. And all the names of the companies you mentioned are familiar to me. So I'm not a developer, but I was on the infrastructure slash networking side, right? So so whether it's like VMware or even later, of course, Databricks is also now one of the most growing companies on the world.
Yeah.
And it's a cool to be in the heart of tech. But moving forward in your journey to, of course, and we know this, like once you are a developer or an software engineer, so you spend your time solving problems, right? So how did you find that, okay, I like solving problem, but I need to be on like maybe the leadership side, so moving toward the CTO, VP engineering. And it's not an easy path. So, and the reason I keep asking all my guests who are like either CTOs or like VP of engineering the same question, because every time I'm surprised by the answer, like why someone decided to go to this path rather than, and because I know brilliant guys who become maybe not CTOs, but they go and choose to become CEOs. Sometimes you see they stay in the architecture, even if they take like a leadership role, they still like code by their hands. So for you, like what was the main reason to choose the path of becoming a CTO?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I have to say I never really like planned on that career path. I was always a tinkerer, always an engineer in my heart, and I like the transition, like I think the transition for me happened. So kind of walking through my sort of like career stories.
Sure.
So I did that startup. Then after that, I went to Flexport, which had like this is in the crazy sort of like Facebook app years, which had like a super popular movies app, both on iPhone and on Facebook, and then had acquired Rotten Tomatoes. And then after that, I joined this company called Symphony. And at Symphony, I was about 26, 27, those circa there. And I, was sort of one of the first engineers at the company. And that was kind of like my sort of like heads first into continuing my startup journey. I was kind of very, focused on delivery and on getting stuff done. And I had a really kind of clear sort of clarity of mind about like how to prioritize work. Part of that was that, the thing that really attracted me to startups was that, if you go, I had multiple forays of interviewing at larger companies, and especially earlier in my career, and I would get an offer be like, oh, this is a web developer role, and then I would be like, oh, okay, can I do product? Is that like an option to maybe do product part-time, or can I like drive a project with with a group of engineers? I don't need to manage them, but I'd like to drive the project. And always like, no, you're this level, and this is the expectation, and we're expecting you to just code, just only really do majority design and build, and that's it. And for me, that was kind of not that interesting. Primarily because I was always so sort of like connected and attuned to what is it that we're building, why are we building it, what value is that creating, and to me that was like intertwined with development. I never wanted to be in a position of where I was like building something that didn't make sense, or that like someone somewhere else kind of had determined and I couldn't really control and had no kind of like input into, especially because I had like such a strong opinion. So when I was at Symphony, what that meant was that I, typically had really good sort of ideas of what we needed to build and then how we needed to build it. And I would, for the most part, I would take on a lot of that work myself. But I would also provide guidance to others, right? Others on the team. This is before I had any kind of management role or any, or anything. And I was always I'm an introvert. And I don't think I ever kind of like for myself thought about like, oh, I'm going to go into a role that, where I'm going to have to like, which is a people job, right? Like I think management and leadership, they're intertwined, and it's really oriented around, work, like very intimately working with people and working on their, development and their career progression and things of that nature. And so I never really thought about that, but I had folks around me at Symphony that encouraged me, and they're like, hey, like, okay, like you like of all the people in this company, like you have really sort of clarity of mind of what the priority should be, what needs to be built, how do we build it, and like you should do this. And to me, I was like surprised, because I was like, I was always kind of like my own sort of like harshest critic, and kind of had like, oh, do I know what I'm doing? But I had all this kind of external validation, right? And so ultimately, this was a sort of a controversial move. One of the CEO, founder of the company, effectively made me the lead of the team, which at that time was small, as maybe 10, 15 people or something like that. And it was a little bit of a controversial move, because there were like folks that were, I was 26, and there were folks that were way older than me that were like, oh, this is weird. Like now you're managing me. And it was very kind of awkward. It was awkward for them. And also it's hard kind of like jumping into a management role, because in a startup, you don't necessarily get the appropriate sort of like levels of mentorship. And so I had to really like learn on the job. What did this mean? But and this was kind of like my, I went from engineering manager to VP of engineering, and this was kind of like the track of, of kind of rising to the occasion of what the company needed, and taking the role. And I think at the time, like, I also like made a number of mistakes. It's hard to be the first, especially in a business that doesn't have that kind of role where you
Right.
can, like, the deep mentorship. So what I started doing was I just started reading a lot. So I I was like, okay, and this is obviously before kind of the dawn of ChatGPT and all of that. So lots of online research. I picked up a bunch of books, and kind of like started formalizing, like, how do I think about what does this mean? What is my leadership style? And like, what are the things
Mm-hmm.
I value? And what is going to be my particular take at this job? So I took it. So I was like, okay, like, remove myself away further from code, and then figure it out, like, how can I provide leverage to the team? Like, how can I make folks on the team more effective? How can I, take a 1x engineer and make them a 2x engineer? How do I make sure that we don't build the wrong thing? How do I make sure that we don't create technical debt? And so I started thinking about, like, systemically across the team and focusing more and more of my attention on that.
Cool. Art, like there is something which, it looks like it happened, in I would say, I'm just looking at your LinkedIn profile. So let's say in the past, since 2011. So that's how many? 14
Yeah.
years. So,
Yeah.
there is a theme, which is, moving to a company that get acquired, and acquisitions on all levels aren't easy, of course, from business perspective, but from technology perspective, like how hard it is, to prepare yourself and the team for what's next, especially if you are to be acquired, I mean, as a company, rather than you acquiring another one. Because I spoke mainly to people who did both. So if I am the one who's acquiring, there's kind of a standard book there,
Yeah.
yeah, we need to do the technical due diligence. We need to do this. We're gonna start to think how we're gonna integrate. But when you are on the other side of the table, how does that look like?
It's messy. I think it is an interesting journey, and I learned a ton. And we didn't just get acquired once; we got acquired twice. So at Deliver, from Symphony, we started Deliver. It was, doing D2C fulfillment for Amazon, basically Amazon Prime for non-Amazon world, as we like to call it. And that business, grew really, really quickly, and we were acquired by Shopify. And then, a year afterwards, Shopify had sold all of its sort of acquisitions in the logistics space, and specifically for kind of like Deliver, they sold it to Flexport. So we then ended up kind of going through this process twice. I don't know if I'm the only person that's happened to, but it was certainly quite a ride and quite an adventure. I think from a technical perspective, I think that there's really two sides to it. I think the first is, or what makes it technical acquisitions challenging. I think the first side to it is, and I really like the book Innovator's Dilemma, and
Uh-huh.
it talks a lot about acquisitions and why they work and don't work, and it comes down to like this sort of idea that there's like companies are sort of like purpose built, like they're successful in a particular industry based on kind of certain operating principles and certain values, right? It's just that they happen to figure out like what's the right formation of like what we should be really focused on and where our attention should go. And if they make the right call, and a lot of it is just some probabilistic, there's timing, there's like ability, all of these kind of things. But if they make the right call, then they're able to like really access that opportunity and grow within that space. And what that extends into development as well, right? And so one of the hard things about acquisitions is that there's a particular way you work as a company, and that means the way you work as as an engineering team. And the and the acquiring company also has the way that they work, and oftentimes it's going to be different, especially if they're solving different problems. So in the case of like a Deliver and Shopify, Deliver was it wasn't a SaaS company. It was, we had there's physical assets, there's warehousing, cross docks, there's managing trucks. There's a whole many different facets of the business, but it's a low margin business. And then with something like Shopify, it's a higher margin business. It's like a SaaS business for small businesses. And so those two things are just going to be built differently. And so, one of the kind of I would say like one of those differences was, and by the way, neither one of these is right or wrong, but it's kind of like each one of these is purpose built for the problem that each individual company is trying to solve. One of the differences that we had experienced was with logistics, you have to be incredibly close to the problem. You have to be sitting at the facility and building software for the operator on the floor. And the reason for that is because like operators on the floor, they're different than, kind of like your common sort of, whatever, like an Instagram user or something like that. And because they're there doing like physical work. And if you don't model the world correctly, they're not, like, you could build all you want, it's not going to work, and they're not going to use it. And so you have to have a lot of empathy of what they're trying to accomplish, and then like work within kind of like their, sort of like their boundaries. And then, whenever you're building SaaS software, like you obviously need to understand your user, but it's not at that level, of intimacy, right? The other thing is that in logistics, because it's a low margin business, every single cent matters. And so you tend to sort of like obsess about like, okay, we have this particular process. And it's a game of all of these sort of like optimization algorithms along the way. And we need to, every single decision on like how you distribute inventory across, a particular geography has a large implication on the economics, the unit economics for the business. And so there is like, this sort of like meticulous thing of kind of measuring every single thing and then looking for every single little opportunity to improve and then making those tweaks and then measuring it again and then making it again. And a sort of this like very, very fine micro optimization over time. And whenever you're in a higher margin business, that's not something that's as valuable as an example. And so, and I think that's, kind of some of the challenges that we experience from kind of a product engineering perspective. But I think the hardest thing is that I think in any acquisition, you have an integration. And what that means is that you need to, come in and, and whatever plans you had up to that point, whatever the roadmap looked like, whatever you were trying to accomplish, you kind of need to like, now there's a thesis behind the acquisition of like, how is this all going to fit together and how is it all going to work? Right? Like, what is, the experience going to look like for, for the customer? And in the Shopify acquisition, there was an existing application within Shopify for fulfillment, right? And our kind of goal was like to take that interface and then like build it on top of kind of our API, the Deliver or X Deliver API layer. and that's a fairly large undertaking. And so I think, kind of navigating, okay, like, what is this, you have like existing engineering team, you have this new engineering team that's coming in, navigating like who does what and who's responsible for, like for each one of these components, and like, how do we get them to work together really well? All become really big challenges. And also just because of those kind of like different sort of like, kind of like working styles and stuff. And so I would say that, it's kind of one of the hard things, like integrations are hard. We spend a decent amount, within each acquisition, Flexport as well, we spend a decent amount on like, okay, here's what is here, right? There's always the complementary sort of like set of services or complementary, a complementary layer. And so doing that integration, I think is hard.
How is the feeling that all of a sudden, especially when, the team is small, and then now you are in charge of a much bigger team. So how that transition looks like?
So I think in the case of Shopify, so our original team was around about 150, and in Deliver, so that was my my org as product and engineering and design, and in Shopify, I forget the exact amount. It was a larger team, and then I think when everything was kind of like merged together, I had about 300, so it was twice the amount. And so I think the hardest part, right, is that I think in the context of the acquisition, like you're coming in and no one really knows you. They don't know your character. They don't know what you're about. Are you trustworthy? And it's very vulnerable because I ended up leading the team, but like folks that were there, before we arrived, that were building a kind of a competing product. They'd be like, oh, well, are you just going to favor everyone from your team? Which is a supernatural kind of like, it's a very understandable bias, right? It'd be like, oh, okay, am I going to be successful here, right? And can I trust you? And so I think what was really hard was, how do I build the trust? And I think, and this was also during COVID, and so it was even more difficult. But what I did was I'm not in it for ego. I'm in it for building something that's really useful and that people really like. That's goes back to kind of the origin of why I love being in this, space and being in this business. And so I got on a plane, I went and I visited, every single office, like all the, and tried to make as much FaceTime with folks. I spent a lot of one-on-one time. And part of it was just kind of like taking things down and making sure that, hey, this is not this is not a kind of a threat. I'm really just trying to do the best for everyone and represent everyone, and not just represent. I don't have any kind of my own interests. I just want to do the right thing. I think from a technical perspective, there were some challenges. Shopify was on top of Ruby. We were using a TypeScript stack. And so you kind of have especially once you integrate, for a certain point, we were just two separate teams, and then we had integrated together. And then once you integrate teams together, it's like there's this unfamiliarity of the stack and what's the patterns and, and how are things done. And that was something that was like an adjustment for folks. Some folks just transferred out. They're like, oh, I don't want to do this. And that was okay. I totally respect that. And so, yeah, I would say like that was the, and the one thing though is if I think about kind of like, once you get to about 100 people, 150 doesn't feel that different than 100. And then 300 also doesn't feel that different than 150. And I say that because ultimately, let's say that you have like, at 100, you have like 10 teams of 10 people. Usually there's going to be a little bit more and they're going to be smaller, but just like, let's say roughly do the math. Then, at like 150, you have to start introducing some intermediate directors. You have to start grouping because, I'm not going to be able to manage more than 10 teams. So, at that point you have lieutenants, you have directors underneath that are basically saying, okay, you have, 3 teams, you have 3 teams, etc. And usually I like to organize teams by domain. So it's going to be like, okay, like what is the business problem that you're solving? And I'm going to give you kind of like, singular ownership over that business problem. I'm going to give you all the data scientists you need, all the front-end engineers you need, all the back-end engineers you need. And you have everything, almost like a GM. You have everything that you need in order to, like set goals and then hit goals. And you can't come and say, oh, I couldn't do it because, this other team, I was waiting for something. And so it was like very sort of like important for me that there was, taking a step back, sometimes you have cases of where like nobody owns something, or where you have more than one person that owns something, and both of those are super problematic. And so for me, it was always like, there's functional organization, there's domain organization. I've always favored domain. I think it works better, especially for when you're dealing with a B2B software. But then from there, like it's always about, okay, every team needs to have one singular charter. It has to be exclusive from all the other teams. There should be no overlap. So I think whenever you take that, if you have like, let's say that we have like 300, 300 people, let's say that we'll just do simple math. I have, let's say 8 directors. Is going to mean each director has about 4 teams.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm still dealing with the directors at the end of the day, right? And it's like maybe I have more directors that I'm working with, but I'm still working with directors, right?
Right.
I think the challenge of that, of course, is that the more people you have in between you and the frontline teams, the more challenge, you lose visibility. You lose control. And so I think then you have to be really judicious of where do you want more of that, right? But going from 150 to 300 is a game of which of the folks that are reporting to me are performing really, really well and hitting their goals. Who can I rely on? Who do I want to give more teams to because I have a high trust in their ability to execute? Mm-hmm. And then and then how do I get more of those people, right?
You mentioned the number 100 because in a previous episode, like with my guest, we were, and this is, a discussion that I did many times about, what's the magic number when a startup, should change something, right? And I'm not talking about the number of engineers, but it applies also to an organization. Indeed,
it's an organizational number.
Yeah. So we're saying like, okay, we're talking about something related to culture and something related to communication, and like we're just trying to guess. Of course, we know that. I mean, there's no one answer, but I mean, should we say like 50? Should we say 100? When things, it's not like goes out of control, but to your point, you need to delegate. Yeah. So just I remember we were talking about delegation, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about about the famous saying like you should scale what I forget, like it's like don't do what doesn't scale, something like this, right? So and it's a magic number, like you
and I think that it's like it really is a function. I do think it comes down to like a function of like there's a couple of factors into it, right? So like one factor is how experienced are the ICs and the engineers on the team, because like you can kind of flex ratios more up and down depending on like how independent folks are, right? So if you have like a team of like, junior engineers, then it's going to be, obviously, like as a manager, you're going to be very hands-on, and you're going to have to spend a lot of time, and you're probably not going to be able to have 10. So,
Right.
So I think it kind of makes an assumption that, let's say you have the teams are fairly stacked with experienced engineers, then you can stretch those, and experience like frontline managers, you can stretch the ratios, I think, to 100, like where it's 100 people, 10 people report to the VP, and then all of them are frontline managers. It's great because it's very flat. You have full visibility. You can provide really good feedback. You can identify patterns across teams really quickly. You can make sure that two people that need to talk to each other will talk to each other. And you can root out inefficiency. You can, exactly, like there's no silos effectively, because you have a purview of all 10. But
Right.
if you have more junior people, then maybe the ratio is like, maybe it's like 8, per team. And so the number becomes 80, right? And so still you have experienced managers. Let's say your managers aren't like, as experienced. Well, maybe it becomes 72, or something like that, right? So I think that's kind of like, how I would like think about it, right? You're right, and there's no exact number. It's all kind of like situational, dependent on like seniority and experience levels. But it's somewhere between, I would say probably between 70 to 100 is that magic number where you kind of have full visibility, full control, and is, the most efficient.
Cool. Now, because you said and talked about solving business problems, so tell me, what problems are you solving now at Augment? Like,
Yeah. Augment, I mean, it's super quiet. I think, in my I've been in the space probably for, around 20 years. And I have to say, like, I don't think I've been as excited about something that I've built as I am about Augment. And and I think particularly because, we're in this kind of like really kind of cool and revolutionary time with, the advancements of these Gen AI models and the things that are possible that previously were very hard to do. And so like, with Augment, what we're building is an AI teammate. Name is Augie, hence Augment Augie. And I say teammate, it's a bit intentional because there's different sort of, kind of solutions out there and tools. And, so I think like one operating model is you have a copilot, right? A copilot is built to support somebody, right? But they're not built to be autonomous. And some of the developer tools that we're seeing, like, Claude Code, for example, they're kind of starting to go, Devin, to be very precise, are going in the direction of like becoming more and more autonomous. But that's an important distinction. And they're not like, and Augie isn't a kind of like a point solution where, you're focused on solving, it's a fixed workflow focused on solving one, respective sort of problem, answering just one email or doing one phone call. And so and it's an AI teammate. Just go back. It's an AI teammate for the logistics space, and specifically for freight and trucking. This is, I'm sure, is like a very kind of unfamiliar world for a lot of people. That's one of the things I love about logistics, is that it's quite niche. It's the hipster in me, but it's also like it's obviously really like sort of country dependent. US is quite large, and it relies on, like, obviously there's many days of transit between two locations. The other interesting thing is that there are about 1 million carriers in the US, 3 million truck drivers. So on average, most carriers or trucking companies are quite small. And so because of that, there's just a lot of fragmentation and non-standardized platforms. No one is quite using or has converged on like one thing. And there's been many efforts to do this, but no one's converged on one thing. And so, any type of automation is really hard to do in this space. And, in this space, you have basically shippers. So think of Pepsi or Nike, and they want to get, their stuff from A to B.
Right.
And then you have the carriers, as I discussed, and then you have brokers, which are service providers typically to shippers to basically get them better rates, get them more capacity, things like that. So what Augment is looking to solve is basically, just like any team member in a brokerage or a carrier, Augie is able to accept emails and answer them, able to make phone calls, able to text and receive texts and understand kind of intent and be able to communicate with external parties. And it's able to follow a particular workflow, right? Like, how do I solve, you can think of something like a tracking problem, right? Like, oh, this driver's supposed to pick up this, this load from, this warehouse and drop it off at Walmart. And I need to make sure that they're coming on time. So I will likely need to give them a phone call. If they're late, there's all of these things that need to happen if they're late. Now, with that example, you can imagine that, well, if they arrive late, there's customer-specific rules. We would reference it as knowledge, but there's customer-specific rules. So like, oh, if it's a Pepsi, shipment, well, Pepsi would like to know immediately, and here's the person that you need to contact, right? And so, Augie operates on these set of skills. This uses workflows to accomplish a particular task, and then uses knowledge along the way in order to basically solve problems and to make better decisions. And so, and with that, we're able to take these very, very manual, very difficult processes that brokers, carriers, shippers have to do today, which a lot of it is, the protocol is the English language in this industry. And so we can take a lot of these processes, and we can basically have Augie do them.
I was looking on the website. I was fascinated, by by the things, it's like it brings it's, and I'm not sure if this is why the reason you call it like this. So it's like augmenting the the technology to behave as as you mentioned now, kind of a co-worker. So the machine becomes as an agent. I don't know what you call it exactly, or like becomes part of the admin team maybe, who should make sure that these shipments are carried, delivered,
Correct.
taken care of, right? So which is fascinating to me. Now it's built on AI. Now I'm assuming like logistics, it's a niche, right? And so how much was hard or easy, because it's one of the businesses which has been around for a long time.
One of the oldest, maybe
Right?
one of the oldest businesses in the world, right?
Yeah.
And in the US, it's the fifth largest industry.
Yeah, what I'm curious about, like we hear about some businesses which like usually they are not sensitive, but they don't adopt new technologies fast. So how was the acceptance of people in this business to, it's kind of a revolutionary product and service that you are not disrupting in the positive sense, of course, the way they operate. So how was like, how they received this? Because it's built on AI, and and the reason I'm asking
Yeah,
you, because AI nowadays, because of all the noise that happens, it can raise a lot of question marks, for business
100%. I think
decision
with
makers.
anything new, I think we see this with every sort of like technological trend, right? There's always like there's an adoption curve. There's a lot of skepticism that's upfront.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think one of the things that makes this industry quite interesting um, is that folks are like folks that actually work in this industry. This is true for a lot of brokerages, true for a lot of carriers as well. Are incredibly entrepreneurial,
Hmm.
and they are looking at what is going to give them an edge in the market, right? The other thing is that like we're in the freight industry in the US, we're in I would say kind of a recessionary environment. Uh,
Hmm.
and so, so margins are tight. And I think folks are looking at like, okay, like how do I, improve my margins? And, and so that's the secondary factor here. So one is super entrepreneurial. They're always looking at like, how can I do things better? How can I make my existing process better than it is? Um, how can I generate margin improvement so that I can grow and get bigger as a business? And then the last piece, which I think is interesting, and to me a little bit unexpected, is that I think ChatGPT has like 800 million users. And so the adoption of this technology, given how new it is very high.
Massive. Yeah.
And I think that like, I think one of the most interesting things is that, previously we had like, the Turing test, right, was sort of like the gold standard for when we would have hit an inflection point.
Hmm.
And I think, and I think this technology passes that test, right? And so I think everyone kind of collectively recognizes that, oh no, this isn't a fad. This isn't just, smoke and mirrors.
Right.
This is real. And so I would say that, given the kind of the usage and the fast adoption of this technology, the realization, I think, from folks that work in the industry, the business owners that are like, okay, well, this is very interesting. And we like, and it's like, if we either we adopt it, right, and then we get ahead, or our competition adopts it and then we fall behind, right?
Right.
And so I would say like that's, kind of like the mental model. And so I would say that, um, even though there's that initial skepticism, I think with anything, what we've seen at least is like, kind of this acknowledgement, right, that this is happening, and it's there, and it's really like, how do you best apply it, and how do you build, with this technology to solve a specific problem, like specific vertical problem, which is really the hard part, right? Like, and so, that's, yeah. So that's what I've seen.
Now, out of curiosity, and I'm not sure if you or might not have any plans, when you were describing all the use cases, let's say, that you're solving. I mean, there are probably pain points, frictions, which Augie, tried to solve. How easy is it to take this and apply it to different verticals?
Um, I think it depends on the complexity of the vertical. There's a couple of sort of like, I think, challenges to building any vertical business. And one of those challenges is sort of like the wide swath of integrations in the ecosystem, right?
Right.
And so, um, I think that's kind of like one challenge, right? So like in order to build a really good solution, you need to have very deep integration, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think the other thing is that I had talked a little bit earlier about like knowledge, right? About the data model, the ontology. of logistics. So I think it's considerably reduces, like if you have like, hey, here's a canonical set of data, you can model it as a graph, as a set of like SQL tables, but a really well documented data set that an agent can query and pull data from in order to make decisions. It's much easier for you to solve a new use case than to start completely fresh from scratch. Because right now, like if you start a new agent for a complete, let's say we're like, hey, we're going to build this in healthcare or something, right? Well, outside of all the integrations, all the, health record management systems and all of that kind of stuff, you would need to know like, oh, okay, like what are all the important entities and what are all the important fields and like, what are the relationships between those fields and like all of the immense amount of domain. Because in order for you to be able to, kind of like both make decisions as well as answer, in a course of this, like Augie, for example, is able to answer questions about what happened, right?
Right.
And why did it happen that way? And like, in a business, in a logistics relevant world, right? Logistics relevant questions, I should say. And like, you would need to then apply the same thing to a completely different domain. So it's not, so you could do that. It would be, it would be a lot of work.
Yeah, and of course, like to your point, there will be some what we call them moving parts, and the more moving parts you have, so that means more processes. More processes means like maybe multiple, I would say, factors that plays the role of deciding what happens. There's a lot of players probably that they need to be consulted, right? So yeah, but I mean, as architecture, or let's say, I'm not sure if architecture is the right word here, but I
Yeah.
mean the concept. Let's say the
Mhm.
concept of. I'm not saying it's easy to duplicate it, but it for me it's like the baseline that we can look at, and probably maybe because also logistics, and this is why I always uh, myself I was fascinated by the way anything that has logistics in it, regardless, like it's not freight only, like it can be anything that has logistics, means like you have like it's like a puzzle, right? And then you say when this happened, and to me logistics is very similar to coding in some way, like so when this there's a condition is this, do that, so it's like
Yeah. There is some, there is like, I think every business is going to have some amount of like,
logic.
logic, like a business process, right? Or SOP or what have you, right? So like, how do I do this job, right? And then with that, it's going to be, what are the tools to do this job?
Right.
So I think it's, what I would say is, I think for like simple, like, there's sometimes there's things that are really simple, like, oh, I get this email, I look things up, and then I reply, something that's quite straightforward. I think you could apply the same system to something like that, right? Whenever you have something that's a complex workflow, I'll give you an example. Like, if you're doing a phone call and that phone call has, you're asking for someone's location, they give you a location. Well, like transcription on voice calls is not quite there yet. And so the location might be kind of garbled. You have to kind of like understand based on like route, where is it located? Like what is this city? So that I can actually capture where this person is. And, and so you have to build software for that. Right. And so like, now if it's a simple, I get a call or an email, I look something up, I give that back, and it's kind of like straightforward. I think that's, then yeah, you can take the same architecture and build towards that and do a good job of it. But the second it starts to get really kind of like, like it gets complex, then all of a sudden you have to, it's traditional software development. Right. And so like, it's not like, we're not quite there where, I think if we get with the models, I think if we get to a point where unsupervised, they're able to generate accurate and correct code, then we could maybe be in a place of where this is more achievable. But I think at the moment, still, like, a lot of the code that surrounds the models and like all the verification and like things that you want to be 100% deterministic, right? You don't want to give it up, leave it up to chance. And so every single problem is solved with a combination of like, oh, there's a model making decisions, there's some deterministic logic that we basically are creating as the hard and fast rules. And it's the combination of these two things that solve a particular problem. And like either, again, as the models get bigger, maybe these problems go away, and then like either the code is generated or you rely less and less on the code at all. But we're not quite there where I think we could do that.
Actually, you took the question that I was preparing, which is exactly about this. But in a nutshell, if I want to ask you this, Art, because you mentioned this, so it's not now, it's not the moment yet, but can we expect at some stage an AI agent that understand the business process or processes, right? And can spot frictions and try to optimize it, and then goes either write a code for that, or it might write agents for that. So am I talking too much science fiction here, or is it with all what's happening with AI now, and we're seeing a big focus on agents from all the major players, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google. So they're now they left, not they left, I mean, but the generative AI, it reached a kind of I would call it tipping point. Maybe still there is something to do more about it. So now we see them like working on videos. They're now trying to enhance, generating images. Yeah. But now also on the side, we see all of them, they're trying to go and focus on the agents also as well. So where do you think they want to reach with the agents? Especially, everyone talks about super intelligence, right? And to me, super intelligence is a machine that will be monitoring all the time, right? What's happening around it, and then it goes and try to solve this. Now, I'm not sure if we're gonna do this autonomously or we're gonna still give that.
Yeah.
Now your take as someone who's been in tech for a long time, especially with what you're doing at Augment now. So what you can tell us, like, what are your expectations? Of course, like, no one can predict future. I know this, safe harbor, but your point of view, let's call it this way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question. I think I think right now, I think ChatGPT had released like an agent kind of like framework. It's a
Right.
visual builder. I think stuff like that works for simple use cases, but then once you have like a very complex workflow with lots of branching, lots of conditions, lots of asynchronous behavior, it becomes so hard to manage that it might as well be code. And so the way that I look at it is that we'll have to get to a point where in order to to like avoid the visual builders and go directly to code, the models themselves have to be better and better. And I do have confidence that they will improve considerably, right? To where the amount of errors and the amount of like, the sort of like the right and understanding of intent is there, and the amount of errors that they make kind of dissipates. And then what ends up happening is that like the code that's generated is a fairly accurate representation of what is being asked for. I think my concern is that not that the models are going to be really good at code gen, which I think they will be, and we've seen that track. I mean, it's just been kind of going up to the right. I think the hard part in all of this is writing the prompt.
Mhm.
And this is, I see as kind of like the singular sort of like big, challenge. Like, even if the models are really, really good with the output, ultimately the input and like how you write it and what you put in it and is very closely tied to the output. And I think it's like it starts to kind of show the fallibility of being human, where we're like sometimes are unclear, our logic ourselves in our head is fuzzy, and so whenever we write it out, it's also fuzzy, and so then the model has to guess and make assumptions that based on that, right? And so this is kind of like what I've seen in the industry so far is everyone's got forward deployed engineers. Forward deployed and forward deployed engineers are the ones that are writing majority of the prompts for production workflows.
Mhm.
And I think we have to think about like, why is that? Right? Like why are we still sort of relying on, I would say semi-technical, technical folks to write the prompts? And I think a lot of it is because of this, engineers have this ability to think about like a bunch of corner cases and like rigorously test. And like that's part of the build process, right? Um, and so I think some innovation will need to happen on the prompt development itself in order for us to be able to kind of achieve what you're describing, which is like, okay, like it's kind of, I don't know about superhuman or AGI, I'll put that aside, but to achieve this sort of like next step in, okay, like not only can I generate really good code, but I'm able to really tease out of a person what needs to happen.
Mhm.
And that's really the hard part, because as humans, we don't think about all the corner cases, all the situations, and all the whole sort of like decision tree. It's hard. It's hard to think about that. And it's hard to write it. And so to me, that's kind of the next thing that really has to happen, which is like, typically if you're doing Claude code, it seldom asks you questions. You tell it, and then it just kind of does things. And then you look at it and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can see how you interpreted that way. That's actually not what I wanted. And there's all this back and forth.
Right.
And the reason for that is because of what I provided. Right. And so like once that evolves and gets better, I think everything becomes, like I think the whole kind of like, you know, uh, we can then, I would say, not just focus on having forward deployed engineers, and then like the whole thing just there's the next sort of like aha moment, right? Um, and I think as far as like AGI and kind of like there's a big focus on like scientific discovery and that's kind of like kind of another sort of like thread here. It's hard because it's definitely not my area of expertise, so I have an opinion just like the dozen others. But to me, maybe the existing technology serves as a foundation of what
Mhm.
ultimately becomes AGI, but it doesn't, given the amount of kind of like effort and expertise, at least from a business process kind of like automation perspective, that you need to have. I think that we're obviously not there, and I think that like it may come, but I think we're going to need to have some like step function sort of like technological sort of like innovation for that to happen.
Absolutely. I think we still have some time, of
We have
course.
time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The only thing is, maybe we're seeing fast developments faster than we used to see before. So maybe this is creating the excitement. Another thing is, which I'm telling a lot of people, and that's normal, right? So
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
we're living in a moment where we have a lot of these people who likes to exaggerate things and start, yeah, like this is the
The
last
hype train.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so and it's not the fault of the people who are behind these technologies. They are not it's not the fault of these people also, because I understand, and a lot of people that are telling me this expression now, we're living in attention economy, so everyone trying to get the attention to themselves. So I can understand like some, yeah, we need to tease people and do all this, but yeah, nevertheless, uh on the prompt thing, I'm not a prompt engineer. Okay, I have the knowledge of how these LLMs works, but I'm not the expert, of course. I left being having the engineer hat quite some time ago, but I did an experiment where actually I vibe coded a tool that tries to enhance the prompt. I'm not sure if it's accurate or not,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I can tell you, the output from a prompt that I write in simple English versus when I put my idea to this vibe coded tool, and the way it gives me the prompt, yeah, I get better results. I can see, because of course it tries there to put, like, act as you are this is the context, avoid this, do that. So of course I get like better result, but still, by the way, still I need to go and back and forward, like even after I enhance the prompt, there's a lot of work to be done. But nevertheless, it's a good point that you brought, Art, as we are coming almost to the end, final thing that I always ask my guests: where to get in touch, learn more about Augment, and maybe know more about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so my email is, and hopefully I don't get any spam. Um,
You
my
don't have to
email
do that.
is, cannot be easier. It's art at goaugment.com. Goaugment.com is also our website, so you can check out more about us. And not a lot of folks with my last name, so easy to find me on LinkedIn as well. So that's another good way to get in touch. So either one of those would be great.
Cool. So I usually don't put the email, but guys, you will catch it. I don't put the
But yeah,
but I gotta put your LinkedIn profile
okay, that's
link.
good. Yeah, maybe we'll scratch the email.
Yeah, and in the show notes, and of course the website goegmind.com. And yeah, like, Art, I really enjoyed the discussion. Time passed very quick. I know, like, we can do more and more of these in the future, hopefully, if you get
Yes,
the time. um because it's like the topic of, especially the AI and the future of AI and where we're heading is yeah, we can have like panels and
that's right.
long
Yeah, 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 yeah,
speeches
yeah. It's a lot
about it.
to say.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
a lot of things. And like, as I was telling you at the beginning, I'm curious all the time, especially to understand this from technologist perspective, right? So I can go and ask someone who say I'm expert, but it's not like the guy who does
Who's
the thing.
actually using the tools
Yeah,
every day, and
e-
yeah,
e-
like having to go through all the
exactly.
pain. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly.
Exactly. So no one like would be better than someone like you are to share this. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing your story as well. Moving across, different companies, getting acquired twice, and merging engineering teams. So I think this is also was one of the important topics we discussed today. So thank you very much for this. And this is for my audience. This is how I end my episodes usually. If you just discovered us by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, give me a favor. I know, like, it's something very cliche, but subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. We're trying to do an impact. We're trying to reach as much people as possible. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming, they are loyal to the podcast. Thank you very much for your support and help. And thank you for getting the podcast this year all the time in the top 200 charts in one of the countries around the world. Like, you, every day I wake up and I find the podcast is trending in one of the countries. So thank you for your support wherever you are, and thank you for supporting on the book launch last month. So again, this couldn't happen in a successful way without your support. And if you're interested in the book, you can find it on Amazon. It's called From Nowhere to Next. If you type my name, you will find it. So, as I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Hit that subscribe button. Share the show with your tech savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs.